Welcome everyone to the first festival training session for this evening. So tonight our session is leveraging Rotary's $2 billion into $6 billion to fight malaria. And my name is Henry Wong. I'll be the tech host today from the Seattle International District Club. And presenting today, we have Jim Moore and Jenny Andrews from the Bellevue Breakfast Club and the Seattle 4. And I will turn it over to Jim first to start presenting. And if anyone has any questions as we go along, please enter them in the chat window and we will get to them. Probably at the end, we should have some time for questions.
Definitely. Jenny, do you want to start out?
I would be happy to, thank you. So my name is Jenny Andrews, and I'm really thrilled to be here tonight. Very happy that all of you joined us. I know that there is a lot of Zoom fatigue going on out there, so thank you all very much. I'm going to give you just a little background on our presentation. I'm going to be talking just a little bit about Malaria Partners International and the global malaria situation as it stands today. And then I'm going to turn it over to my Malaria Partners International colleague, Jim Moore, who's going to dive in a little bit more deeply into the complexities of battling this disease and how local Rotarians and our Rotary colleagues around the world are mobilizing to end malaria. But before I do that, I want to thank all of the 34 clubs in our district who have partnered with Malaria Partners International over the years. We could not do the work that we do without people like you who are generously supporting our work and also really providing hands-on service in the fight to end malaria. So like Henry said, I'm Jenny Andrews. I'm a 25+ year member of the Bellevue Breakfast Rotary Club. And prior to that, I belonged to the Southtown Rotary Club in Eugene, Oregon. So I've been in Rotary for a long time. I'm the past president of Bellevue Breakfast Club, and I've also chaired the International Service Committee. And I am privileged at this stage of life to be the executive director of Malaria Partners International. We are lucky, Jim, to be able to hear from Jim Moore today. Jim is a longtime board member of Malaria Partners International. He's also one of the smartest people I know when it comes to malaria. He's been a great teacher and mentor for me, and he's been engaged in the global health world since, I hate to say this to you, Jim, but since 1966, when he was involved with the Peace Corps in Nepal. And then after Peace Corps, of course, he was involved in international development, so he's very well integrated into this kind of work. We'll be hearing from him very soon, but before we do that, let me introduce you to one of the clubs that we have partnered with in the fight to end malaria in Tanzania. We're fortunate to work with Rotary clubs around the world, and this one is just an especially dynamic club. So Jim, if you want to hit it.
Of the things we think, say, or do.
Is it the truth? Is it fair? Will it feel good with a better fresh air? Is it the truth? Is it fair to walk outside? Will it be beneficial to walk outside? In the beginning of creation, there was no you, but today we are
Well, I'm glad you got to hear the music. I'm sorry you didn't get to see the video because it's pretty special, but I would encourage you to go to YouTube and Google it and watch these young people in this Rotary Club and just share their enthusiasm. So with that, I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about Malaria Partners International. MPI is based in Seattle. It actually was born out of the Seattle 4 Rotary Club during their centennial year. So our board started out as primarily people from the Seattle 4 Rotary Club and neighboring clubs, but we have grown and really expanded. And today we have board members from 9 different Rotary clubs throughout the United States. And we have partnered with over 100 Rotary clubs, both here in the US and around the world, on over 30 projects so far, and there are a lot more coming. We've founded two affiliate organizations in Africa, Malaria Partners Zambia and Malaria Partners Uganda. And we've also worked very closely with District 9101 and their Malaria Coordination Committee to support malaria work in 10 countries in West Africa. So our broad vision is that malaria is eradicated worldwide, and our plan to get there is to ignite a passion among Rotarians, just like we have done with polio. And we see that growing every day. So now we can move on, Jim, to some facts about malaria. Malaria, sadly, is the greatest killer of all humankind. There are many researchers believe that it has killed more people than any other disease in the history of the world. And every year, there are about 228 million cases of malaria each year. And 409,000 roughly people die from malaria every year. The vast majority of those are young children and pregnant mothers. And the reason for that is the anemia that is caused by malaria is devastating to their bodies. 94% of those cases are in sub-Saharan Africa. And the really important factor to consider is that malaria is a preventable and treatable disease. So we should not be seeing numbers like this. And with Rotary's help, we will not be seeing them in the future. So let's talk a little bit, now that with that kind of background about malaria, let's talk just a little bit about what's going on with malaria today. And you can pop to the next slide there, Jim. So you guys may have heard about some news coming out in February about a new vaccine that people are very, very excited about because it is 77% effective in preventing malaria. Very exciting news, and we want to celebrate that, but it's also important to recognize that those tests were done in a very small group, 450 children in a specific area in Burkina Faso. So while it's very exciting and we're cautiously optimistic about it, a lot more testing needs to be done on that particular vaccine in larger test groups in a wider range, wider area, to ensure that it will be as effective as it has proven to be in this small sample. R21 is actually a modified form of a vaccine that has been around for a lot longer called RTSS or Mosquirix. This is, as I said, it's been around for a while. It's been through clinical trials, and it is now being used to vaccinate hundreds of thousands of kids in Africa as part of their normal vaccination routine. So it's very exciting also. It has about a 56% efficacy rate, which is good. It's not what we're looking for. We want at least 75% efficacy rate, but it's good, and it's already preventing malaria in these areas. The difference between these two vaccines, however, is that R21, this new one, requires only one jab. So a child can get one inoculation and be protected. The second one, the older one, RTSS, requires 4 jabs. So to us, that doesn't mean a whole lot. We pack our kids in the car and we take them to the clinic and we get their vaccination. In Africa, it's a different story because people may have to travel miles and miles and miles to get to a health clinic for a vaccine. So that the one jab is a very appealing part of R21. So we're excited about it. R21, they surmise, may also be cheaper to produce and easier to produce than RTSS. So we're excited and we're waiting to see what happens with future testing. So Jim, if you want to go on to the next slide. In addition to exciting news in the vaccine world in malaria, we also have some exciting news in vector control. It's really, actually, I find it fascinating news. There's a lot going on with regard to vector control. The Imperial College of London has created genetically modified Anopheles mosquitoes, and that is the type of mosquito that carries malaria. And what this genetic modification does is it distorts the sex ratio between males and females using gene drive technology. So it's kind of a complicated way of saying it makes more females, or excuse me, more males than females. Most of you probably know why that's important, but it's very important because only the female mosquitoes bite. They bite because they need human blood or animal blood in order to produce their eggs. So with a population where more males are produced than females, the immediate effect is that there are fewer mosquitoes biting. And if it all plays out as scientists hope, the long-term effect is the collapse of the population of that type of mosquito, which would be a game changer for malaria as well. In addition to the Imperial College of London, there's a lot going on in London, or in the UK with regard to malaria. There's a British biotech firm called Oxitec that has created male Aedes mosquitoes that pass on a gene that kill the female offspring before they mature. So it's a similar situation, somewhat different from what I just described with the Anopheles mosquito. But the Aedes mosquito is the mosquito that carries dengue and Zika and West Nile virus. So similar types of work being done to eradicate diseases, those diseases. The interesting thing about this study is that unlike the study I just mentioned with the Anopheles mosquitoes, that is being done completely in a controlled lab setting. The second one that I mentioned is actually being done in the wild in Florida. Scientists have released these genetically modified mosquitoes in Florida, and they are studying them in the field. In addition to the genetic modification that kills the females before they mature, they have also added a fluorescence to these mosquitoes so that when they capture the mosquitoes and when they're studying them, they can identify which have been genetically modified and which have not. So again, it's very exciting work that's going on, and it's giving us a lot of hope for changes in the future. And Jim, if you want to flip to my last slide before I turn it over to you. I just, you know, you hear a lot of negative stories, and the facts and figures about malaria are pretty disturbing, but I want to share some success stories too. You may have heard that on February 25th, El Salvador was declared malaria free, which is very exciting. That now brings to, there are 7 South or Central American countries that have been declared malaria free. And that means that brings the total number worldwide to 39 countries that are malaria free. For those 87 countries where malaria is still occurring, we are seeing incident rates drop, which is very exciting, but we have to stay vigilant, just like we do with polio. There are always going to be variants. There are always going to be complications. This year, COVID has created a huge complication. We've had shortages of testing equipment. We've had supply chain issues with malaria medications. So this is going to require long-term vigilance, just like our fight against polio. But with Rotarians rallying around this cause, we're absolutely positive that we can eliminate malaria. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim Moore, who will take a much deeper dive into malaria and how Rotarians are rallying to the cause of eliminating it. Jim?
Thank you very much, Jenny. Well, I don't know if any of you all who are watching today or who watch the recording of this session have had malaria. But most of you who've heard from us previously know that in order to get malaria, it takes the bite of the female Anopheles mosquito who's active in the evenings. And she has to bite a human who has the parasite to be able to acquire it herself and pass it on. That fact that the parasite exists in a human reservoir already and then is transmitted by this vector, the mosquito, identifies really the 2 components the Rotary projects have been focusing on in terms of controlling and in the long run eliminating the disease. Pending the development of a vaccine that we can all pursue like Jenny has described, and we can pursue as we did with polio. Let's look at some of the projects that Rotarians have been taking on and carrying out for a number of years. I mean, one of them, insecticide-treated bed nets, we've seen Rotarians do at a national scale like they do in Papua New Guinea, and also at the scale of a boarding school or an orphanage. These nets that keep people from getting bitten by mosquitoes when they sleep under them at night are often very much focused on women and children to prevent the disease. And then there's public education, which is really present in almost every Rotary-sponsored project. It does something called social behavior change communications and utilizes multimedia techniques. Improved case management is something that Rotary doctors have taken on to improve the diagnosis, rapidity of treatment, and effectiveness of treatment, as well as the ability to identify quickly and transfer severe cases to places where they can be treated successfully. And then there's the medication part that includes testing and treating. It includes the drugs that might be provided to clinics or hospitals. And these are artemisinin-based combination therapy drugs that are used for normal or uncomplicated cases of malaria, distributed at clinics and camps. Burkitt's lymphoma is the main pediatric cancer in Uganda. So children are affected by Burkitt's lymphoma who've been repeatedly exposed to malaria due to a relationship with the Epstein-Barr virus that produces this solid tumor that's been treatable for many, many years. And you saw the Oyster Bay Club's and listened to the Oyster Bay Club's song about the four-way test. Well, we met Oyster Bay through just that kind of a project supporting Burkitt's lymphoma treatment regimens. And then there's the environmental management, and finally, which means draining swamps and standing water areas, improving drainage, even larvicide spraying or spraying highly dense areas in urban areas with fogging spray. And then finally, it's led us all to this getting to zero technology or method that utilizes something called Integrated Community Case Management Plus, which essentially takes community health workers, places them in their home villages with the equipment and the training to diagnose and treat malaria, as well as respiratory illness and diarrheas, and moreover, conduct surveillance so that if they find a case, they can not only test and treat that case, but test the remaining members of the family where that patient is located, as well as neighbors within a fixed distance to try to eliminate that human reservoir of the disease. Now, Rotarians have been leading malaria awareness programs in a variety of mechanisms. They've been on TV, they've been on the radio. But one thing they do employ as well is traditional community drama groups at the village level or on a stage like this, as you see on the left. It's a more entertaining and conveys the message better than just speechifying. But speechifying has its role, as seen on the right, where on World Malaria Day in the Gambia, the head of the coordinating committee for the Gambia, the Malaria Coordinating Committee, along with public officials, including the First Lady of the country and the Minister of Health and the Vice President of the country, are there with Rotarians and other dignitaries, as well as business people and Rotarians too, learn about prevention and treatment of and elimination of malaria. Let's move to the Copperbelt in Zambia. Zambia, a country in South Central Africa, about the size of Texas and a population of around 19 million. And you see on the right the shape of the country showing at the rural health facility catchment area level the actual incidence of malaria that those health centers have reported, or that have been reported by a combination of health centers and community health workers. This is data current up through September of last year. And what I want to highlight in this is the southern province of Zambia, where since 2014, community health workers have been posted in villages and have helped to drive the incidence of malaria among children under 5 to 0 over the past 3 years, and the incidence among the total population to the low single digits, which is where we want to get with malaria before it can be eliminated entirely. So this getting to zero strategy builds on major commodity programs, the spraying of houses indoors, the mass treatment in some locations where it's appropriate, assuming under the assumption that everyone has malaria, so we'll try to treat everyone with anti-malarial drugs. And then the distribution, wide distribution of bed nets based on the number of sleeping areas per household. Zambia itself has just gone through a national program of spraying and bed nets. And these programs together lower the burden down to the low teens or high single digits. That is the incidence of malaria to those levels. And then we add the public education component and the community-led case management surveillance, the ICCM plus, with community health workers that are trained, equipped, and placed in their home villages to sustain that lower burden of malaria and drive it towards zero. The three components of this, the vector control, which we've just discussed, the spraying and the bed nets, are aided by education at the village level from community health workers. The medical care itself, community health workers now provide the first line of diagnosis and prompt treatment and follow-up and tracking of the disease, and also for diarrhea and respiratory illness. And then education and information, a social behavior change program, which involves community engagement and a variety of social media or multimedia efforts, including school programs, as well as radio, TV, and in-village drama, traditional drama groups, are led by a collaboration of community health workers and Rotarians. So what's the impact of these malaria ICCM-trained community health workers? Well, on the left, you see a typical rural health center during the malaria season where more than 70% of the patients are there for malaria because they have malaria symptoms. And they overwhelm the staffs and the resources of these facilities. And on the right, last week, outside the Marundu Health Clinic was a child who couldn't find a seat inside and was feeling so poorly that his mom had him lie down on the grass outside the health center because of that overly full clinic. Once community health workers are posted to the Marundu village area, this will no longer be the case. Because here's the approach. With the health facilities only diagnosing and treating malaria, the incidences that are reported is shown in this first triangle. But once you add in those trained community-based health workers, in fact, initially the incidence reported goes up because at the village level, they're catching cases that previously were not being seen at the level of the health center, perhaps too far away, or the person was feeling too poorly to make the trip to the health center. But over time, the overall incidence declines because the diagnoses and the treatments are being done much earlier. And more importantly, as time goes on after the second or third year, the community health centers experience a far, far smaller burden of malaria, and most of the diagnosis is really taking place and the treatment at the village level by the community health workers, as you can see there. So PATH, MASEPA, and the National Malaria Elimination Center worked with Tulane University to study what the impact of this was over a period of 4 years. And what they found was about more than a quarter reduction in the rate of malaria for every community health worker posted per 1,000 people, in the rate of serious, severe malaria among children under 5, the U5s, and among people of all ages, and about a third reduction in deaths among those same populations. Well, the community health workers that Rotarians are training and equipping are being posted at a rate of 1 per 500 on average. And the consequence of that, based on this statistical study, is a doubling of these kinds of impacts. So we go from a situation like this on the left, where the waiting rooms are overflowing, to a much more manageable situation like that on the right. And the Rotarians in the Copperbelt formed Malaria Partners Zambia and took on the challenge of eliminating malaria in their province of 2.5 million people. Federal Way in our district club led the first such project that was completed in October of 2019 in these two really rural districts with 301 community health workers trained, equipped, and posted. And then the Aspen Rotary Club of Aspen, Colorado partnered with Kitwe with 200 more community health workers, completed last fall in the Chilabambwe district, right on the Congolese border up here. And we've now started the training and deployment of a new cohort set of community health workers in the largest project to date, which is almost $1 million in 3 districts. Together, all of these projects represent over 1,500 community health workers benefiting more than 800,000 people getting basic health care at the village level for the first time. Who are these community health workers? Well, they're volunteers in Zambia. In some countries, they're partly paid, or they may even be fully paid, but they're recruited from their home villages and reposted there once they've been trained. Their training is 5 or 6 days, and then they are deployed to the health center closest to their village for 6 weeks or so of on-the-job training. They're about 50-50 male-female, mid-40s, 9th grade education, and mostly farmers with a few business people and teachers thrown in. And during the malaria season, they spend 10 to 20 hours a week diagnosing, treating, and reporting on malaria, as well as diarrhea and respiratory illness. And they stabilize severe cases of malaria and refer them to health centers that can treat them properly. So this is what it looks like. This is classroom training last week in the Mufulira district. And here's the field component of that training, where a rapid diagnostic test kit like this is being used on this child, and it turned out positive. And then these are, this is an example of the kind of equipment that community health workers get, a very robust bicycle called the Buffalo bicycle. And what's funny about this photo is that the rider there is John Banda, who's the equivalent of Dow Constantine. He's the county commissioner, basically, in Mufulira district. And on the back seat there is a District 9210 Governor, Lucy Kasanga. So Rotarians and local officials are heavily involved and supportive of this process. There you see a graduating class getting ready to take ownership of their bicycles. And they're equipped as well with the shirts and the hats, bad weather gear, gumboots and raincoats, backpacks. They get, of course, the medicines, the diagnostic test kits, and educational materials that they can use once they're posted to the home village. And here's a link showing the happy graduates last week of the first cohort in Mufulira. Let's see if we can play that. All right, let's see if I can transition. Good. So this buildup, these 3 projects that followed on the example of the Southern Province approach in Zambia to driving malaria towards zero have really set the stage for a much larger effort. And I'd like to mention that the Federal Weight Club that did this 301 community health worker project completed in October of 2019, that was their 3rd project in the Copperbelt with partner Zambia clubs. So pretty long relationship we've had, over a decade, with clubs in that area. Well, that brings us to Rotary's first program of scale, and I hope you all saw the May issue of the Rotarian magazine that described this program, but I'm just going to hit it briefly. The vision that was created by Rotary that produced this was that they needed a mechanism for large-scale, high-impact programs anticipating the end of the eradication of polio and the need to identify the next targets that Rotarians could undertake in worldwide campaigns. And so they were looking for these kinds of high impact programs that could attract implementing and resource partner organizations and have long-term replicable impacts. And then part of that long-term and replication principle was being able to provide learnings to other parts of Rotary so that these programs could be scaled up. And the programs of scale are now going to be an annual competition for $2 million in Rotary money. It's envisioned as a long-term program, 3 to 5 years for implementation, and evidence-based, locally relevant to the needs of the beneficiaries, consistent with the cultures and organizational contexts in those environments, meeting the needs and integrating the various stakeholders in implementing that allows them to grow further and in the future and be replicated, and implemented according to a strong theory of change where monitoring and evaluation and collaborative learning is really, really key to being able to take these projects, these programs, and scale them up and also adapt them to other environments. And then, of course, guided by Rotarians with a high profile for Rotary and in leveraging the unique strengths that we Rotarians can bring to civil society betterment programs like this. The review process itself began with the submission of proposals, summary proposals in January last year. And then that was winnowed down to 5 finalist proposals by May. And those proposals were submitted by September. Very extensive proposals followed by interviews of the various stakeholders at the country level as well as the sponsor level in terms of the Rotary Club or districts involved. And they used 3 principal methods for evaluation: readiness to scale the program, the ability to use it to learn during the course of the program, as well as to spread that learning to other areas of Rotary, and a proper representation of Rotary as a good steward and Rotarians as people of action. So the proposal that was put together by the partners here, the National Malaria Elimination Center in the Ministry of Health, Malaria Partners Zambia, and the Rotary clubs that comprise it, more than now nearly a dozen clubs involved, Malaria Partners International, World Vision, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, PATH, MASEPA, which is PATH's malaria control and elimination partnership in Africa. And then, of course, the sponsor, our own Federal Way Club, as the sponsor of this project, which proves you don't need to be a massive 300-member club to be able to pull this off if you have the talent and the strategic partnerships that combine the skills and abilities of a variety of resource and implementing organizations to create this kind of a project. And the objectives of these partners in this proposal were to reduce malaria dramatically, incidence of the disease, deaths, and severe cases, and to shift the detection and treatment to the community level, freeing up health centers for and their resources for other public health needs. And then raising Rotary's national profile in Zambia, creating opportunities for other national, provincial, and local collaborations, and reinforcing highly motivated Zambian cadre of Rotarians, and attracting new Rotary members to Zambian clubs. All of those were objectives of this project. And the key factors for Rotary in selecting partners for Malaria-Free Zambia as the project that they chose was a systems approach, a strong monitoring and evaluation and learning system, Rotarians playing key roles, national visibility, and then co-funding, taking 2 million and moving it up to 6, and a broad partnership created in spite of a COVID-19 environment. And I wanted to point out that it's covering 10 districts in 2 provinces with 2,500 community health workers. It's strengthening that first or community level of public health service, and the second level, the health center level, along with the data systems that support them, benefiting over 1.3 million people. Well, thank you. If there are any questions, we'd be delighted to take them at this point. Appreciate your attendance, and I'll stop sharing the screen.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Jim. Very informative. So we'll go, anyone have any questions, you can feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself, or you can also use the chat window if you want. Sala, I see you've had
Yeah, I always have questions. I am on the board of Malaria Partners International because I heard you present at a Rotary Club meeting. And I'm wondering how we can spread that, how we can encourage Rotary clubs to ask us to come and speak, or how we can make that happen more often.
Sounds like you, Jenny. You're muted.
I can take a stab at that. Sala, as you probably know, we have developed a speakers bureau, and we are actively working that speakers bureau. We've got one of the board members who has taken that on as her personal project. And so we're reaching out through the speakers bureau, through our newsletter and our social media channels. But we would also, I mean, obviously word of mouth is typically the best in terms of getting the word out about what we're doing with regard to malaria. So we rely quite heavily on Rotarians like those in this meeting to help spread that word. Jim, did you have any other thoughts on that?
I really don't. I think that one of the things we can ask be done is, Sala, what you've been doing, which is communicating at the district level in Ghana. I think that spreading the word right now is a very propitious time. People are still using Zoom to meet, and that's the easiest way that we can do these engagements. We have a one going scheduled for Sweden in November, and we have another scheduled for Geneva, Switzerland, a club there in June. So, you know, the word is getting around. I think we just need to use whatever media we have to extend it, the opportunity to people.
Is there any way to extend that also to Africa, where we want to engage Rotary clubs in this initiative?
Well, how did South Accra come up with the desire to have a presentation?
I don't know exactly.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
I don't know.
I don't either. And we also had the club from Ibadan, Nigeria, and another Nigerian club express interest. We have a connection with a Nigerian club that was created by the Rotary Club of Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. So that presentation, though brief, took place about 3 weeks ago.
I'd like to open it up and ask anybody else who's in this meeting if you've got ideas, because we're always looking for ways to spread the word about malaria. And our goal, of course, is we're not shy about saying that we would very much like malaria to be Rotary's next focus, like polio has been for the last 35 years.
At least public health focus, yeah.
Yeah.
Jim and Jenny, our district are members of Global Washington, which is that large grouping of, service providers. They're having their annual convention. I think it's going to be in December of this year.
Usually
Maybe
is.
we should try to get on that their forum as one of the speakers during that session.
Larry, that's a great idea. We are also members of Washington Global Health Alliance, but I love that idea, and I'm going to make a note to make sure we reach out to them.
Good.
Yeah, and I think members of both of those organizations include World Vision and the Gates Foundation, so it could be a persuasive presentation. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, I recognize a lot of the names there that are members of Global WA.
Yeah, I'd like to also recognize while we're on here that Bill Felt is there and has actually imported a daughter from Germany who's a Rotarian. And Ed Sterner, whose club supported our Copperbelt 2 project and who we've shared some support with, Lake Forest Park, Ed, right?
Yeah. And I was gonna ask the softball question of kind of what are we looking for in the way of support from clubs? You were mentioning 10 districts. If there are a lot of clubs, maybe it is. If we can get a lot of clubs to all ante up a fairly modest amount. I'm not sure what your strategy there is.
Currently, what we're doing is focused on two things. There's a large community health worker global grant training and equipping project being organized for Uganda in an area where we've done projects, 2 global grant projects previously. So it's a follow-on there. Plus, we have a number of small, what we call small starter grant projects that can lead to larger projects. Several in Uganda, one in Mali, another in Liberia, several in the Gambia, and Ghana has had 2 so far. These are, like what we say in Rotary, date before you marry. So they're the small scale starter projects that run from, I would say, a few $1,000s up to $15,000 or $20,000. They're typically club to club kinds of projects, but they're a good way for a club to get to know another club. And that's what we're hoping will happen in Nigeria with the Fisherman's Wharf clubs. Fisherman's Wharf contributed to our Copperbelt 2, as you all did, Ed. And so it will be great to have a club like Fisherman's Wharf take on a project with partnering with a club in Nigeria where Malaria Partners International can contribute a small grant amount as well.
So the $6 million thing, is that already fully funded, or?
Yes. Yep, it's $2 million from the Gates Foundation, $2 million from Rotary, $2 million from World Vision. And Bill, if he's on, could comment a little bit more about that. Bill?
He's there.
Well, you said it, Jim. We've got a down payment of $1.5 million to take us through the first 6 to 9 months. The spending is heavily front-end loaded with the training and equipping of the community health workers. So we'll probably spend more than half of that money in the next 12 months.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, I just also want to mention that I mentioned early in my presentation that my trip to Ethiopia with Ezra and other folks from District 5030, the first one especially was just life-changing for me. And I just want to encourage anyone who's on the call that if you're interested in traveling with us to Africa, we're exploring when that will happen, given the whole COVID situation, but we're thinking of a trip potentially in early 2022. So keep that in mind, and it really, it might change your life too.
Have a few more minutes. Any final questions?
Hi, this is Howard. I have been wanting to go on a mission for a long time. I know Ezra, and we have a district conference coming up in October where we're going to be honoring Ezra and his warriors. Hopefully you'll be there so we can honor you as well. And we would love to also make sure that we have at least a breakout session regarding malaria and all the great work that Bill Felt has done with Federal Way. And so I will have someone get in touch with you guys to talk about that. I'm curious if the malaria project work has been shared with other service organizations like Lions and Kiwanis. Have any of them stepped up the same as Rotary clubs, or are they not aware of that? Or
in Uganda, I know that Lions Club is very active. What they've done specifically in malaria, I'm not sure. The National Malaria Control Program in Uganda is closely aligned with Malaria Partners, Rotarian Malaria Partners Uganda, which is their collection of Rotary clubs that are collaborating on projects in Uganda to eliminate the disease. I don't know, in Zambia, they're not nearly as present as Rotary is. But that's a really good suggestion, and it's certainly part of the civil society collaboration that we seek overall.
well, the reason why I ask is I'm looking to kind of break down the silos of service. And I mean, I was a Lion when I was a junior Lion in high school, a Lion when I got out of college, only because there was no Rotary Club where I grew up. And now, of course, been a Rotarian for 20 years. But I'm curious to see if there's a way that we could work together with Lions to maybe bring some additional support to grow locally and maybe even regionally or whatever, to see, I mean, it's all about the end result, which is eliminating malaria. And so if there's something I can work on with that, I would love to bring that in the upcoming year.
That sounds fabulous. I
Great
think
idea.
these strategic partnerships are just essential to our work, and they span the range of organizations, volunteer and otherwise.
Well, I'll send both of you an email. And Jenny, you're a Rotarian out of Bellevue Breakfast?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
So I have both of your email. I mean, I can look up both your emails. I'll
Yes.
send you an email and maybe we can, I'm actually in the middle of writing an email, as I'm listening to you, of course, to the incoming district governor for Lions for the Seattle area.
Oh,
Right,
This could be the beginning of a good conversation. So.
great,
nice.
great.
Awesome. Well, looks like we're up for that time. So Jenny and Jim, thank you so much again for your presentation this evening. So much great information. And I will stop the recording and